Welcome to Preparing for AI with Matt Cartwright and Jimmy Rhodes, the podcast which investigates the effect of AI on jobs, one industry at a time. We dig deep into barriers to change, the coming backlash, and ideas for solutions and actions that individuals and groups can take. We're making it our mission to help you prepare for the human and social impacts of AI. Don't leave me waiting here, everyone. Lead me to your door. Welcome back to Preparing for AI with me, Matt Cartwright, and
me, Jimmy Rhodes.
And this week we are going to do something which some of our listeners have asked us to do, which is to look at the kind of dystopian possibility of the future. But we thought, because, we don't want to do everything negative, that what we do is do a two-parter where we look at a kind of possible utopia that we could see, and then a possible dystopia. So this will be two parts, one this week, one next week. First of all, looking at a possible utopia. We're going to look at basically 25 years, so something before 2050, and then an episode next week with a possible dystopian future with AI. So I'm going to hand over to Jimmy, and we're going to first of all, because it's obviously the biggest piece of news this week, just talk a little bit about what's just come out from OpenAI.
Thanks, Matt. So, just in the last 24 hours, there's been a huge announcement from OpenAI, which has, in the last half an hour, it's caused me to resubscribe and go back again from Claude to OpenAI to try out the latest features. So if anyone hasn't heard or isn't aware, OpenAI have announced ChatGPT O, which stands for, what does it stand for? I've forgotten. Omni. It stands for Omni. So they've released ChatGPT Omni. So what this is instead of having like vision and audio and text to speech and speech to text and LLM functions, all as kind of separate things, which is what they've been up to now, it's basically all in one. And so there's a whole bunch of demonstrations on YouTube in the last 24 hours of its capabilities, and it's got near real-time speech. So when you talk to it, I think it's got something like a 200 millisecond delay, which is pretty much what you'd have in conversation with a human. So it's very, very natural. The audio, like the actual voice of ChatGPT, is much more natural sounding, has all the ums and ahs and pauses and inflections and emotion. And some of the video demonstrations demonstrated like pretty human-like emotion. Like I say, so it's kind of real-time, talking to you in real time. It sounds much more, it's got much more emotion in the voice. It can simulate different emotions. It can sing to you. It can be more dramatic if you want it to be. And some of the demonstrations, so it's also got vision. So it's got real-time vision. And I think in the near future, it's going to have real-time video vision capability. So it can actually look at what's going on in the room. It can talk to you about what's going on your video feed. And it can interpret what's in images as well, really, really, really quickly, almost in real time.
You can hold up a piece of paper to the camera with 2 + 1, and it will tell you the answer is 3. Not that being able to calculate 2 + 1 is the most amazing thing that a large language model has been able to do, but it's got that. That's what you were saying about kind of the multimodality. And you've talked about this, from the first episode, but we're starting to see it now with this model of bringing those things together. It's obviously far off from AGI, but as you see that kind of journey to bringing everything together, I think there are 2 points which they're not necessarily the most, technologically big advances of this model, but they're things that I think in the real world are really useful to people. One is that what I guessed before was DALL-E. So the image creation, you can now specify text and it gets the text right, which is massive because, we talked about previously about how it struggled with text because, it's a different model. What it was doing, without going into all the sort of technical side of it, is you're starting with chaos and then creating an image from that. It didn't have the functionality of text. Well, you can now add text in. I think that is a huge thing potentially. Because it's been one of the sort of barriers with image creation, I think, until this point. The second thing, and this kind of contradicts something that we talked about in the last episode, where we talked about how, large language models are not that great for doing search when you're doing internet search. But one thing now is, rather than with ChatGPT 4 when it used Bing search, and you would see the sort of, the purple wheel spinning round, and you'd wait for it to do a search. It's not instant, but it's very, very fast now, and you can see it's checked multiple sources. I was using the new Meta model the other day, which I think is really good actually, and it has a search function using Google, but it was coming back with search results and it was using like one, maybe two sources, whereas it looks like this new model, it's searching fast, and it looks like it's looking at more different sources when it's searching on the web. So even though, Jimmy in particular was saying that's not the best use of a large language model, which I agree with, but with this new functionality, I think it now is much easier to, certainly to foresee that it's not far until you will be using probably large language models to do what you would use Google for previously as well.
Yeah, and like some of those things are, the examples you gave there are great, and they're examples where you've just got, things that we already had but are much faster and more natural and more real time. But to really bring it to life, some of the examples, to just sort of give some examples of how this might apply to real life situations. Some of the examples they demonstrated, and this capability isn't there yet, but they demonstrated them to sort of illustrate the kinds of things you're going to be able to do. So one of the examples was there was a blind person, and they were actually with a real-time video feed. ChatGPT was talking to them about what was going on around them and could actually guide them through the streets of London. That was one of the demonstrations they gave. And again, it requires this real-time capability. Like you can't have like a massive delay to do that kind of thing. So it was using the video vision to actually, like I say, like talk a sight impaired person through what was going on around them and actually help guide them through the streets of London. Another example, and we had a translation episode just the other week, but it was real-time translation, again, without any gaps, without any pauses, as real-time as a human would. And it wasn't perfect, but it did some really good examples of near real-time translation. And there was one final example I saw, which was, so education. So we haven't actually done a podcast on education, the education sector yet, but it was similar to what you just sort of outlined. It was basically helping someone with their homework, so they could show a drawing or a picture. In this case, I think it was a triangle, and it was like which one's the hypotenuse, which one's the how do I find this angle, this kind of thing. And again, so it was like using video to help in real time. And it's like bringing all those capabilities together, and maybe they're capabilities that have been there before, but it's a bit more clunky. This feels a lot more natural, real time, understanding what's going on around you, understanding video, audio, and visual inputs, and sort of deciphering that and working with it in real time. And again, this is actually, some people are saying this is a version of ChatGPT 5, which is sort of part way through the training, something like that, maybe an early release of it. But you're starting to see the direction things are going in, where like it's interacting much more seamlessly with the kind of world.
I know we'll move on to the main episode, but I just want to finish that point. A friend of mine sent a message this morning. He's been basically doing coding of AI models to basically fire sort of customer service phone call scripts and get them to be summarized. And the message he sent this morning said, one of the reasons AI development speed is so disruptive, you spend a load of time building something only for OpenAI to just launch the ability to everyone. So, he spent weeks working on this. And I think that is a great kind of summary of what we've talked about at the kind of rapid speed of change, that something comes out. And it's great because it kind of democratizes things, but it just suddenly, it does all this work that people have spent hours and hours and hours or weeks and weeks doing. And suddenly, bang, you can just do it in seconds, and it's open to everyone. So good and bad, I guess. Yeah, good way. So do you want to introduce into this episode, Jimmy, and what we're going to do today?
Yeah, so today we've got a positive spin. We're talking about Utopia, and then we're going to follow that up with a doom and gloom episode on Dystopia. But just to clarify before we get into it, obviously the theme of the podcast is around jobs and the impact on jobs and some of the socio-economic impact. And there's also the sister podcast talking about the environmental considerations. We're focusing on that, and we're focusing on the next 25 years. We're not going to get into any kind of sci-fi Ian M. Banks or Terminator 2 dystopian Blade Runner style scenarios. We're not going that far. We're talking in the fairly near term, and we're going to be talking about the things like, for example, in the Utopia, we're going to be on the utopian side. We're going to talk about the potential for shorter working weeks, for UBI, for the potential positive effects on healthcare. These kind of things, some of the things we see happening in the next 5, 10, 20 years. And then obviously we'll get on to the flip side of that, the side that you love, Matt.
Yeah. So this is going to be a tough episode for me trying to be the optimist, right? Right. So I'm going to start off this episode actually so that we start off on a really positive note with an introduction on something called tech optimism. And this is from Andreessen Horowitz at 16z.com, who's also on Substack. So to credit him with this. So here we go. Lies. We're being lied to. We're told that technology takes our jobs, reduces our wages, increases inequality and threatens our health, ruins the environment, degrades our society, corrupts our children, impairs our humanity, threatens our future, and it's ever on the verge of ruining everything. We're told to be angry, bitter, and resentful about technology. We're told to be pessimistic. The myth of Prometheus, in various updated forms like Frankenstein, Oppenheimer, and Terminator, haunts our nightmares. We're told to denounce our birthright, our intelligence, our control over nature, our ability to build a better world. We're told to be miserable about the future. Truth. Our civilization was built on technology. Our civilization is built on technology. Technology is the glory of human ambition and achievement, the spearhead of progress, and the realization of our potential. For hundreds of years, we properly glorified this until recently. But I'm here to bring the good news. We can advance to a far superior way of living and being. We have the tools, the systems, the ideas. We have the will. It's time once again to raise the technology flag. It's time to be techno-optimists. I looked at a few polls this week, and healthcare was regularly coming up as the top choice, where people who feel optimistic about AI think it will positively affect humanity. And that's definitely my personal feeling. And I think, Jimmy, you're in pretty much the same space as me. So let's start with that. We want to do a whole episode or even a series on healthcare soon when we're just waiting for some guests. So we won't spend too much time. But looking ahead then, 25 years in the future, I don't think we're looking at a world with no disease and everything cured, but much less disease, and primarily because I think personalized preventative care and better treatments, but also reduced cost of healthcare leads to hopefully more equality of access, and things are already happening. So this is a really kind of good space. So AlphaFold 3, which is developed by DeepMind, which is a kind of protein folding prediction, call it an algorithm. Let's say call it a technology, which basically can predict the 3D structures of proteins, and it's absolutely crucial for understanding things like cellular process and drug design. It's something that the DeepMind CEO this week, when they kind of announced this, is predicting within 2 years that there will be new drug treatments developed by AlphaFold, which will be not just created but will actually be available in the market. So there are no guarantees, but this is something that's happening now. And the most recent one that came out before this is in silico medicine, and they've actually designed a drug already. ISM 3412 it's called. It's got FDA approval in the US, and that is literally AI discovering a drug, developing a drug. It's what's called a small molecule inhibitor of MAT2A, which targets MTAP deleted cancers. And this was designed on this in silico's generative AI platform called Chemistry 42, which uses machine learning techniques to basically generate novel molecular structures. So, there are things already happening. I think for me, this is, it's number one, and it's the one that I'm like properly optimistic about.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I think we're talking about here novel solutions which you wouldn't be able to do very quickly in human time.
But I mean, we're talking about 25 years, and this is stuff that's happening now, right? So like, what do we see happening 5-10 years into the future, or even 25 years? I mean, I've said, we won't cure all disease. I mean, I don't think we will, but we're being speculative here, but where do you see the kind of big developments?
Protein folding. So the stuff you were talking about that allows you to do is simulate all of the different effects that drugs will have on the body, and there's also the potential for what's called designer drugs, which effectively we can already take someone's genome and sample their genome and see what their genetically. Right? Sorry.
Designer drugs for Friday night. Yeah.
Designer drugs for Friday night. Yeah, exactly. That as well.
Design your own drug before you go out on Friday night. That we would never do.
But yeah, absolutely. Like the so basically what they can do is they can take they can take a DNA sample from you. They can look at your actual genetic sequence. One they can already look at that and tell you whether you'd be prone to different kinds of disease and what kind of like in your genetics themselves. But in the near future, they're going to be able to also start looking at creating and implementing designer drugs, which target specific diseases, but actually like specific to your genetic structure as well, your DNA basically. And so there's going to be absolutely tons of advances in this kind of area, and I think the latest advances in AI are only going to accelerate in that. And all we're talking about here is with respect to drugs. We'll obviously move on to pharmaceuticals. We'll obviously move on in this segment as well to the potential for care by things like robots. We talked about robots a few episodes ago, and one of the things that is looming is this huge generational shift where people have been having much less kids, and there's going to be a much older population in the near future, and healthcare is already creaking all around the world. So I think that's an area where AI is kind of arriving at the right time in a way. If you can offer care,
I think it actually you go back a step. It's actually the thing that's not there so much now, and although maybe it's the very first episode, I talked about a particular example where I'd been to this event and they'd basically taken a picture of my eyes and then told me about the the sort of arteries between my eyes and my heart, and they'd been able to give me an assessment. I think it's the diagnostics as well. And looking 25 years ahead, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to look at a diagnostic that basically assesses your particular situation and your particular risks, and then allows you from hopefully a fairly young age to then target certain kind of therapeutics. And I take a lot of supplements, and I've researched it quite a lot, and I've researched things that I kind of trust and believe in, but they are but these are quite sort of general. These are supplements that is a recommended kind of stack of supplements that will help with your brain health and will help with blah blah blah, but none of it is is targeted as an individual on your individual structure. And I think that's one of the things that AI has got the ability to do, is to be able to really create things that are very specific to your, like you talk about sort of your DNA or your gene structure. I mean, when you were talking then, I was kind of feeling myself almost getting into the Dystopia episode as we, analyze everybody's DNA and have a kind of record. But, as we're on the positive account on healthcare here, there is definitely the potential, if it's done right, for this to absolutely revolutionize, people's lives. And you've already got, when you have a baby, before the baby is born, you're able to do checks from essentially from the womb of certain indicators of of potential disease. And that's not an AI thing, but using AI, the bigger data sets that you get and the more data that you get on patterns, and are able to then, like you say, create specific designer with a specific kind of designer drug, not Friday night designer drugs, but designer drugs for disease. So this seems like something that, I can't see how it can't be an improvement, big pharma put aside. So let's stay with the positives here. I don't see how this is the one area for me of AI where even if there are difficulties, where I think in 10 years time we're going to be in an almost unimaginable place in terms of what we can do with healthcare.
Like we're going to explore all this much more in a future episode on healthcare, but I think it can't come quickly enough in a way. Like I've been speaking to a lot of friends of mine and family and all the rest of it, healthcare systems around the world are really struggling. As an example, in the UK,
they're collapsing. They're not struggling.
Collapsing.
They're absolutely on their knees, aren't they? Let's be honest.
Yeah,
they're collapsing. They need AI.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and I think that's, if anything, that's probably going to be the problem here, is like how quickly it gets adopted, because some of these institutions are notoriously very, very slow moving. So
they're leaving the profession. They're leaving the profession. So you literally need AI, because we're not actually going to have. I genuinely think we're not going to have enough healthcare workers without AI. Like it's one I think we talked about before, about like removing the burden, and how in most industries, like AI is seen as a threat. I actually think in healthcare, like people should not feel threatened if you work in healthcare by AI. It's just going to make your job, sort of acceptably busy, because there is so much overload, and it's only going to get worse. And let's not get into all the reasons here, but this is something that we need. Like we need it yesterday, so it can't come quickly enough.
Yeah. And just as a final note, like I've heard a lot of people complaining, like maybe because people are overworked and overloaded and all the rest of it, but complaining about the bedside manner of some healthcare professionals and all the rest of it. And interestingly, there was a study not that long ago where,
just finishing off on that exact point, because you mentioned kind of healthcare and social care. So AI-driven kind of virtual assistants, and I call them chatbots. They're not really chatbots, but are being developed that can provide companionship and support for the elderly. You can get an AI girlfriend. Like, jokes aside, that kind of thing we think of as something that the very young generation are going to use. That kind of level of support for lonely elderly people, and also on a practical level, virtual companions, whether they're robots or on a computer, that can engage in simple conversations, remind people when to take medication, assist with daily tasks. Forget robots being able to lift people in and out of beds and stuff, but actually just giving some level of, maybe it's difficult for an elderly person to see a robot as companionship, but a robot will listen, and a robot or an AI can sit there and listen to you for a long period of time. It doesn't need to go to sleep. It doesn't need to go and look after somebody else. The idea of everyone having their personalized, assistant in a care home to look after them, that's got to be better than the current situation. So, social care, like we said, we want to do an episode on this. So I think we avoid going too deep into it, but there's so many, potential positives from healthcare. So let's have a look at something that we have kind of already talked about. We talked about UBI, universal basic income, on a previous episode, but sort of this idea of more time to yourself to do what you want to do, less work. I think a fundamentally different economic and social model, also using things like agents to do your, morning life admin, your emails, managing your diary. This idea of being able to focus on the things that you do and study the things that you like doing, rather than studying the things that will get you a stable job. I mean, 25 years is a long time, and it's difficult to work out what an economic model is going to look like in 25 years. But I think I'll put my neck out and say it's going to have to look very different to what it looks like now. We're not going to be able to reach the utopia with our current economic system.
I think we're talking utopia. We're being idealist in this part of this episode. So for me, like, what the utopia looks like, I've heard various things. I've heard people saying AI is going to create jobs, and actually there'll be plenty of new jobs and all the rest of it. And maybe that's true. I guess to narrow it a bit, like I suppose the scenario is AI is going to take all the jobs, but we're going to get the utopia. For that to happen, for me, the path over the next 5, 10, 25 years to get to that position, because ultimately in 25 years' time, what you're saying is pretty much no one has a job. Everyone is on some form of universal basic income.
Well, their job is not the
And
main purpose of their life anyway. Their job is a
maybe the
part
job's,
rather than,
something like that, right? So it's just not 9 to 5, 5 days a week anymore in 25 years' time. You get supplemented with universal basic income. It's enough to get by. You're comfortable. You've got everything you need. You don't necessarily, it's not like everyone's got a yacht and a Ferrari and all the rest of it. We're not all rich, but everyone has their basic needs fulfilled. And we actually have a lot more scope to do the things we want to do in our life. That's kind of the utopian vision we're talking about, right? So, like, it's not that everyone can have anything they want anytime they want, but we have a lot of freedom, and we get there. We get to that point with kind of minimum disruption. And for me, so going back to what I was saying, for me, what that looks like is very rapidly governments around the world start looking.
I think that maybe we're not ambitious enough when we think about a UBI, and we almost think of it like, it's almost like a social security payment that's just paid out to everyone, like universal credit in the UK, but that's just paid out to everyone. I wonder if it's, and we're talking about a utopia, is about making as many things as possible that people need to live available without charge. So, energy is free, food to a certain point is free, transport is free. Because if we're able to, and let's not get into detail of whether we tax the hell out of companies or whether we just use the productivity of, robots and AIs to create that. But if we do it right, the wealth that's created by machines, that wealth can be put back into the system. And it's not going to be the same everywhere. Different countries are going to do it a different way, but there's a way in which you can provide not just the basics to live, but provide the basics for a reasonable standard of living where you don't have enough money to travel over the world all the time, and maybe we don't do that anymore because of climate change or various reasons, but you have enough that you have all the things that you need, in the way that when society started to be built, that's what it was about. Money was only ever there as a way. It replaced kind of bartering. It was it's a currency. The idea that a social system provides you all of the things that you need to live. And then, there'll always be people who have more than others, and there'll always be an ability for people to potentially go out and find a way to use their talents to, increase that amount. But I think it needs to be more than just everyone gets, £4,000 a month. It needs to be about providing the things that people need and societies need to be able to function to a level that is very different and is much better than the way that the world is functioning at the moment.
Do you want to know what Sam Altman said just last week? What his take on it is?
Well, I've read an article from Sam Altman. It's not from last week, but on his new version of capitalism, which I wasn't a big fan of. But no, you tell me what he said last week.
Well, I'll read this because so Sam Altman's always been a fan of this. I'm reading this. I'm a bit cynical about this because of where it's coming from, obviously. So Sam Altman has always been a fan of universal basic income, but his idea for people struggling financially in the future is he thinks we should have get a job. He thinks we should have universal basic compute.
So I'll just draw you back to, I'm trying to just check when this is from, 2021, where Sam Altman wrote a paper essay, I guess, called Moore's Law for Everything, where he said that Moore's Law for Everything should be the rallying cry of a generation whose members can't afford what they want. It sounds utopian, but it's something technology can deliver. Imagine a world where for decades everything, housing, education, food, clothing, becomes half as expensive every 2 years. And then he goes on, you can look up this article. It's at https://moores, moores.samaltman.com. And then he talks about capitalism for everybody. So, I guess I just said this. Some inequality is okay. In fact, it's critical. But he talks about progressively taxing income and how that hasn't worked, and we should focus on taxing capital rather than labor. I don't disagree with that. It's quite an interesting article, but I think, unfortunately, when Sam Altman suggests it, there's going to be a lot of us who are a little bit cynical.
Yeah, I mean, he's, when it's the super rich, super elite club who are actually at the front of what's happening right now and what's driving the change to society, I'm a little bit cynical and a little bit jaded at some of their suggestions. But I mean, being serious, like I think you're right. I think going back to what you were saying before, I think maybe we do think too small. I think on a 25-year time span, things like universal basic income are more realistic. But I do agree, like in the long term, what is capital for and what is money for if things become cheaper and cheaper? And I mean, I guess it's a way of saying, it's a way of democratizing what you do with your time. So if you get given, your universal basic income, then you might spend it on a car and a plasma telly and a nice house, and I might prefer to go traveling around the world in a camper van and just do that eternally. And so I think it democratizes things. It's not communism. So I think maybe there'll always be a place for that because people like to be able to choose what they do with their lives. But ultimately, in a kind of utopian, I think the main thing about this conversation is how do we get to that utopia? And we'll talk about the dystopia later. But the main thing is that I think governments and societies and people need to get involved in the debate like as soon as possible, because I mean, we could be wrong, but in our opinion, I think this that's what
I'm going to have to be careful here to make sure this comes across as a positive point. And it's a sort of follow on from the economic model. But I think one thing that will definitely happen, whatever happens, actually, even in the kind of dystopia in a way, is I actually think there will be a kind of lower inequality and the reason I say that, I think in the utopia and the dystopia, I think unfortunately there's going to be a very powerful, top class, whatever happens. But I think what will happen is a squeezing of everything else into a narrower band. And I think most people, maybe not your kind of ultra capitalists, maybe not a lot of Americans maybe will disagree with me on this, but I think if you look at a kind of European model, the countries that do really well for happiness are always the Scandinavian countries, and they have less equality. But what you get with less equality is you get a kind of squeezing into a narrow band, like I said, which at a societal level means you have much less of a gap between the middle class and the working class. Well, you don't have necessarily a middle class and a working class. But I think where this is difficult is if you are in the upper middle class now and your family has maneuvered yourself from a lower class into a higher class in our current system, then even if you're okay, you see a relative kind of drop in status relative to those lower social groups that are brought up. And I think the difficulty is going to be if you're someone who is upper middle class. A lot of upper middle class city liberals would say they would be much happier in a world where we had more equality. But when their kids are no longer going to the best schools because they're going to the same schools as everybody else because we have a much narrower band. I think one of the interesting things will be how people accept that, because then their lot is not necessarily getting worse per se, but their relative societal status is changing.
The counter argument I would give to that, and given that we're talking about utopia here, is that I can see a radical change. It's only a specific example that you used. You talked about, one-on-one.
Yeah.
Actively all going to have one-on-one customized education that's at the right level for the child or the person. Fully tailored education. I can see that coming. It was literally in the...
Well, education going to have to change much anyway, isn't it? Education is going to... Yeah. It's one of the big ones. Again, we want to do an episode or a series on it, but education, the whole idea, the premise, the system, everything is going to have to change at some point in education.
Yeah, it was one of the points we had in the show notes, is like again, in the utopian world, like actually a lot of the services that we have to pay a lot of money for now, or where there's a status, or where there's this, that, and the other, there's a massive democratization of all those. So, like your legal, creative, professional services, where all of that can be done by AI in the future, it either becomes a lot cheaper or effectively free, right? Um, you can already get pretty much free legal advice off some of these AI models, and they'll say it's not legal advice and all the rest of it, but in the future,
As of
24
today.
hours, so
yeah.
it takes
I
that
should just say,
away.
I mean, my point with that was like, in a societal level, I don't think anyone would argue that that's a bad thing. All I'm saying is that one of the tricky things is that to get there, what it's going to require is for people who are currently higher up the chain to be relatively worse off. And I think the transition is going to be difficult. I mean, I think there are many positives. So, I think this, if it happens, it means less war. It means less social issues. It means less crime because, people are generally happier, more equal societies. There is,
Better educated.
There's a reason. Yeah, exactly. There's a reason, people who are stealing things from people, I don't want to kind of, say it's okay, but most people who are stealing things don't have something, and the people they're stealing from do have it. So, there is a difference in some way, whether it's class or whether it's just in material wealth. You make a more equal society, then you have generally a happier society. But I think it's just the challenge is that narrowing that band is more difficult for the people at the top, because relatively they feel worse off. Let's talk just a little bit, I think really briefly, because you were kind of touching on it on your last point, but I'm going to let you do this because I know you're someone who's sort of very positive about the idea of personalizing content and entertainment and the sort of democratization, I guess, of services and creative, or just the ability to create things.
Wait, we talked about Sora. I always get Sora and Suno mixed up, but Sora was the OpenAI text to video model that came out a little while ago, and it's been a bit quiet since it came out.
When we should say when it came out, it's not publicly out. It exists, but at the moment it's being kind of red teamed and used by industry people to get it ready for a public release at some point.
And sticking with the optimist side of things, like I really can't wait to be able to apply my own. Like I can't create videos. I don't have that creative ability. I don't have the time or the money, but I can't wait to be able to create my own versions of like popular video, popular film and TV stuff. Like for example, like I'm sure loads of people can resonate with this. Like George Lucas really messed up the original Star Wars series when he did the remasters. I want the ability to create my own version of Star Wars, to create my own little universe, all this kind of stuff. I don't have the creative ability to do it myself, but like I can see that happening in the next 5 to 10 years. Actually, we talked about customized designer, medical solutions and pharmaceuticals solutions. Like I really want, and it's already happening with things like Suno, where there's an argument against it because you're ripping off the creative industries and you're making it more difficult for the creative industries, all the rest of it. But at the same time, you can make a song about whatever you want right now. And this kind of stuff's only going to get better and better. Soon you'll be able to make your own feature-length films purely from your imagination. And I think some of that sort of stuff is incredible. Because, and like for kids as well, like the imagination of kids, I can imagine, it probably wants some guardrails on it, but like, they can, you can create stories for kids. They can create their own stories. I think there's some like really amazing stuff that we're going to be able to do in the next 10, 15, 20 years in that kind of space, which yes, there's a downside. There's a downside that it is taking away from the creative industry in a big way. But we're talking about a utopia here where people don't necessarily need to work, or people have more hobbies, or people have more free time. And I can see that like entertainment.
And I don't think we need to go into a lot of detail because it's episodes that we've done before, but we talked about legal and kind of professional services, and as those become cheaper, as you're able to use whether it's large language models or whatever whatever the architecture that's being used in the future is, a democratization of those kind of services can only be a positive people, and a way for people to know their rights, to be able to use AI to be able to ensure fair treatment. I think that kind of democratization is something that in a utopia, I guess it's it's equality, isn't it? It's more about everybody having rights and taking the power away. And legal is the best example of the person who has the most money is just able to win a court case. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case if you democratize it. Another thing we had an episode on, robots. I think, we should talk about robots in terms of them becoming actually helpful. So examples, we talked before about social care, but, for everybody, kind of domestic support, whether it's looking after your kids or whether it's cleaning your house, whether it's doing, your admin, whether it's providing security for your house, supporting the disabled to be more independent, robots coming into our lives and serving a positive purpose.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think there's a load of situations, and we're not necessarily talking about here like, okay, the robots can just deal with the elderly. I don't think it's about that. But like, so it's not going to be, that's their only form of interaction. But you've got to acknowledge that there's a huge gap already where there aren't enough people. I mean, my grandmother like has someone who comes to see her and spend a bit of time with her every day. And she's lucky; she's living at home. She's in her 90s. But she's living at home and she has care and she has a bit of help. And relatives come and see her and all the rest of it.
And as someone with two kids, one of my, it's not fear, but concerns is when they are at school that's finishing at 3:00 every day. Well, what the hell do we do? How the hell do you get kids to the bus in the morning? Or, I mean, okay, school might look very different, but you having something there that's able to help you with, I don't want to call it care, but help you in terms of, supporting your family and allow you to be independent. I guess, if you're not working so much, actually, you maybe don't need that, but it's having something. And another way to flip it around, I had this conversation with someone the other day, was going back to the healthcare example, is actually, well, maybe what happens rather than the robots doing the healthcare is maybe the robots and AI does the other work, and then we have more time, people, to do that healthcare, and look after our families and be able to be together, and the robot is able to support us with that, but we're able to provide that personal service. So your example of your grandma is she doesn't have anyone there in the day. Well, that's because they're out doing other things, but actually if they don't have so many things to do, there's the ability to spend more time with your family.
Absolutely, yeah. It's going to free up our time and resources. There was one other thing I was going to mention on robots, which is there are tons and tons of dangerous jobs. There's loads of dangerous jobs out there. People having to, stadium.
That was what I was thinking you were going to say. Yeah.
Then for me, that's great because that's getting rid of exploitation. It's
customer service jobs where people get abused by, by people and police, whatever. Any of those people who deal with difficult people, being able to replace that with a robot, it saves a person, and also maybe the person's not going to take such an aggressive tone with the robot when it knows the robot can shoot them through the brain. Well, I was going to say the robot's going to have no emotional I'm ready
response.
For the Dystopia episode.
You're ready for the
I'm already changing my mentality over.
You're warming up for the dystopian episode. No, I think there's tons of areas where robots will be a huge, huge, huge benefit to society.
I just wanted to finish off with a couple of little points, because we have the kind of sustainability series and we talk about pandemics and stuff in other episodes. But this definition of many people may be not familiar with this term, but there is a term called wicked problems. Wicked problems are these kind of unsolvable huge problems that we have in society. So climate change is one, pandemics, natural disasters, and one of the things that you've got the potential with AI is early warning signs, as well as being able to potentially fix some of those problems. So if you look at things like earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunami, things like that, there is definitely a way in which some of the prediction tools that are currently able to be used for, weather systems. I mean, I think it was in the last couple of weeks, there is a new tool which is able to forecast weather, much, much more accurately than we are currently. All of those kind of tools, they're not going to fix those problems in one go, but they're a way for us to deal with those wicked problems and a way to kind of be able to better prepare ourselves and, get ready for some of the challenges we're going to face. And the last point I wanted to make, which was a really minor point, but I think it's something that's been sort of sticking with me in the last couple of weeks. We talked about the AI pin and the Rabbit R1, and it's been ridiculed and we've sort of mocked it a little bit. But a reduction in screen time has to be a positive thing. So if we can start to carry out tasks by converting our interactions with tech from typing and looking at screens into natural language, we're still going to look at video, we're still going to look at content, but a lot of the things that you do, you only access it through a screen because you have to. I like to get my information from podcasts, and from listening to stuff. One of the things I'm studying at the moment, every article is available as an audio file, and I find it much easier to do it that way. And part of the reason actually is genuinely I'm sick of looking at a screen. I'm sick of it. If I can have some time where I close my eyes or are able to look at the sky outside. So it's a tiny, tiny thing in the scheme of some of the things we've talked about today. But I think that is something where AI is definitely and hopefully fairly quickly going to move us away from relying on all of our interactions with tech from looking at, and Jimmy uses this example of, we all sit down and look at rectangles, to a much more natural interaction. And that can only be a good thing. So I think that's probably it for our Utopia episode. I think I'm sort of won over by some of the points. I'm looking forward to the Dystopia episode, but there's definitely a lot of positive things in there. And I think still for me, the healthcare thing and the potential to kind of change equality, those are the two really big ones in there. So that's been really fun to do. We will end as we usually do with a Utopia song. So a very happy song for us to end on today. And we look forward to next week's episode where we will hit the dark wall of dystopia. So that's it for this week. Thank you for listening. Keep following, keep spreading the love, and make sure to subscribe and pass it on to all your friends. Take care, everyone. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
We're told that tech will take our jobs away, but we know there's a brighter day.